Mark Talon, and my wife Serena is just doing a little bit work on the other side there. So we moved in this area, beautiful area, Murchison and Matiri Valley, where we bought the property last year. We bought the property with the intention to live there, but mostly to give the majority of the property to the Center of Contemplative Research, with one active center in Colorado, USA, and one center in Tuscany, in Italy. And I think tonight it is my honor and privilege to introduce Dr. Wallace and Dr. Natanya. And they will take this chance to outline during their visit over here, to outline to all of you what the intention is of the center. So not much talking from my side, I'll leave it all to you.
Thank you so much, Mark. And thank you all for coming. I really had been looking forward to this evening to be able to share with each of you, I'm sure your backgrounds are quite diverse, how we understand what is a Center for Contemplative Research. And I have been a meditator at our first Center for Contemplative Research in Crestone, Colorado in the United States since we opened in 2020. And then also for roughly the last year and a half, I had been executive director as well. And now I'm very soon going back into retreat. They have been training as contemplatives for many years, all of them. They wouldn't be able to enter one of our centers if they hadn't been very well prepared. And of course, I'm sure most of you have heard of meditation. Maybe some of you are practicing meditation. But these meditators haven't just been meditating for 5 minutes a day or 10 minutes a day. Something has drawn them to go deeper and deeper and deeper into the practice of meditation on a daily basis. Not simply because it reduces stress or makes them a little more focused in whatever else they're doing, but because they've started to see that the cultivation of the mind is at the root of every kind of improvement we would want to make in our world. And of course, the great contemplative traditions of the world, all in their different ways, have shown us how primary our perceptions are in the very nature of reality. So of course there's reality. There are the things that appear to us. There are the other people, the interactions we have, the environment, other species, and so on. Everything, it appears to us. But what is the enormity of the factor of the mind we bring to our experiences? And subtly, 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 how the state of that mind can start to shift the way reality is actually arising. So that's almost just like the entry-level hunch. Maybe my mind has something really big to do with how reality comes about. And so if I wanted to make big changes in helping other people, helping our world, helping our environment, what if cultivating my mind could be an extremely powerful factor in that? And so for myself, the choice to stop dancing and actually first devote myself to a degree in theology and then later devote myself to a doctoral degree in Tibetan Buddhist studies and religious studies in general, but then even after that to devote myself to a life of retreat. Again and again, those choices were directed toward going inward to find the depths of understanding, of wisdom that could arise through grace, through sensitivity to the intricacy of causes and conditions, that as long as our minds are agitated, as long as our minds are unstable, we won't be able to see the whole panoply, the whole variety of causes and conditions, that what's bringing about the situations we encounter. And so I'm going back and forth between my own experience and that which I think is really shared between all the different people who come to our CCRs, even though each of their background is utterly unique and quite diverse. So for each of them, they've reached a point where they want to commit to being in solitude, to meditating not just 1 hour a day, not just 4 hours a day, but more like 8, 10, 12, and more hours per day as the mind becomes more and more and more refined. And that refinement allows one to see other dimensions of consciousness itself, because what we think of as being aware arises in one way when we can only see it for a split second, and then the mind is drawn off again into thoughts and memories and concerns and plans and pressures and things we need to do. But in the space of retreat, in the space of solitude, one starts to see how much the mind is creating all day long, even when there are no other people around to seem to be the cause of one's problems or the cause of one's distress, because you start to see how the flow of your mind isn't being influenced by anything else but itself. And so the sensitivity one starts to gain toward what it is to have a mind and what it is for one's mind to be shaping the world becomes more and more real in retreat. And even, well, actually for almost all of those at the CCR, they have done retreats in the past. So that taste, maybe 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 3 months in retreat, made them realize I need more of that to go to the depths of my mind, not less. Not just, oh, I got a taste and back to the world again. And so the rigor of the training enables one to see other dimensions of consciousness itself, which it's not just some trip to say, oh, I want to see other dimensions of consciousness. It's actually looking into the depths of the consciousness that's present all the time, and from which our world itself, our experiences, our interactions, everything that appears to the mind, it's the dimension of reality from which it's arising, but we can't see it most of the time because our minds are so distracted by or even veiled by what are known as the 5 obscurations. And I won't go into that quite yet. There might not be time tonight to speak about those in detail. But basically, the imbalances in our minds that make the stability and the peace and the balance of meditation difficult. But we need to meditate an awful lot in order to overcome those imbalances. And once one has devoted sometimes tens of thousands of hours to stilling the mind, quieting the mind, balancing the mind in this way, contemplatives of the past have shown us that there's a level of mental balance that enables one to break through into wisdom, that enables one to break through into direct understanding of the nature of causation, of the subtlety of all the different factors that bring about even a moment of thought, much less a complex moment of interaction and experience in our world, much less the state of our entire global environment and political scene and so on. So that depth of stillness allows for insight, allows for wisdom, allows for penetration of what's really going on. And we might say that this level of training is parallel to being a professional ballet dancer. Or, what's maybe more familiar to you is the Olympics. That there are places where one has to do extremely intensive training to reach a level of human achievement. In the case of athletics, I think the word achievement is very apt. And there, that sets standards that then in turn are inspiring to our whole society about, well, what are the potentials of the human body? What are the potentials of human training and refinement of physicality and the feats that human beings can reach? And that's very deeply inspiring to millions, if not billions of people. But if you saw a CCR as a place for intensive, advanced meditative training, which actually needs to be more all-encompassing than the training of an athlete, because they still get hours in the midst of the day when they're not training and when they're just resting, and their mind can be all over the place. Not during competition, but in the sense of those years and years of training. But for those meditators committed to a long-term retreat at a Center for Contemplative Research, they actually can't afford to be distracted for 1 minute in the course of an entire day, and eventually even in their sleep. Because every moment of distraction actually is like falling back and losing ground one had gained through the training. So the training actually has to become continuous, both in a formal meditation posture or session, and when cooking, when taking a walk, when interacting with other retreatants, which we do in very, shall I say, disciplined and subtle ways. One can't even lose the discipline of concentration when interacting with one's fellow retreatants. And so I present that analogy of an Olympic training center here, the Olympic training of the mind, because we aspire to set standards that we know millions of people are not going to be doing this kind of mental training. But if it can raise the bar of what people even think of meditation as being about, because in some circles, meditation or mindfulness has become very popular, but in a sense, that's just like the tip of the iceberg of what meditation can be about. It's been plucked out of its context in many cases. And so it's not going to the depth, even in the way it's being taught, it's not going to the depth that the Center for Contemplative Research meditators have been trained in. And so our hope is to set a whole new standard for our contemporary world of not just what contemplatives or yogis or saints of the past have been able to do in very rarefied conditions within the religious traditions of the world, but bring that on the ground and say, these are people who came from lives in business, lives in the arts, lives in athletics, lives in academia, and so on. And for whatever reason, each one of them chose to withdraw for a time, sometimes an extensive period of time, in order to hone the depths of their mind, and then be able to share that with others. And actually, I think that's a good moment to hand this over to you in one of the primary ways we hope to share this.
Namala, sorry, can I interrupt a little bit? Someone's slide is the card.
Dwight highlights you.
On one.
Sure.
I don't like to leave anyone out. So we can maybe just pause and cross my legs. This term meditation, most people aren't interested. Isn't it true? Something esoteric, special, spiritual people, or what have you. It has a special kind of maybe elitist quality to it. Oh, you're a meditator. Oh. Or I've been asked by some people, how little meditation can I do to get such and such? That's a good question. But in the tradition in which I've been trained for now more than 50 years, going back to Tibet, going back to classical India, the term that we translate from Sanskrit as meditation, in Sanskrit doesn't mean meditation, as we think of it. It's a very simple connotation. Speaking to people in this rural community, this farming community, the term cultivation ring a bell? Meditation, bhavana, means to cultivate. Cultivate a garden, a field, a forest. It exactly means to cultivate. And so it's wonderful, because we all need food, to be cultivating grains, fruits, vegetables, and so forth. But they don't just grow by themselves. You have to till the soil. Shall I give you more lecture on agriculture? You need to cultivate them. You need to look after them, care for them, and then harvest them when the time is right. But an uncultivated plot of land, in a way it may have great natural beauty, but you may not get any food out of it. Right? And an uncultivated mind can be a source of tremendous distress. All the world wars we've had, where did they come from? People's minds. Not from technology, not just from politics. Somebody's minds, a leader's mind, and then he gets a lot of followers, and then their minds. All the world wars have been created by people's minds, manifesting in various ways. All the desecration that we're so wearisomely, sadly aware of in environmental catastrophe, where did that come from? People's minds. Greed, short-sightedness, ignorance, right? It's minds. And where did the magnificent music of Bach and Beethoven, the art of Van Gogh and Rembrandt and so forth, Michelangelo, Da Vinci, where does the great art come from? And the great philosophical traditions, the very deep spiritual traditions, technology, where does that all come from? The mind, of course. So the untrained mind can be one of the most terrible forces of nature. Bigotry, racism, greed, pathological nationalism. We're all too familiar with it. It all comes from the mind. So the mind that is not balanced can be a terrible force. 80 million people died in World War II, primarily because one man triggered it. One man with a very, very, very troubled mind. We all know that, right? And so what we're talking about here in the Center for Contemplative Research, and I'm going to emphasize the complementary endeavor that we're engaging in, is all about cultivating the mind. Now, any of you with a background in biology, you know we are in fact a very unusual species. We're not just naked monkeys, because our nearest neighbors, the chimpanzees, the gorillas, well, very close, right? Except compare human intelligence with that of a chimp or a gorilla. They're doing very well until we start wiping out their habitat. They're doing very well at survival and procreation. How much intelligence do you need, biologically, evolutionarily speaking? How much intelligence do you need to survive and procreate? Well, ask a crocodile. They have a brain about the size of a walnut, but they've been around here a lot longer than we have. So you don't need much intelligence to survive. Just ask the rats and the crocodiles and so forth. And yet, having spoken at length with evolutionary biologists in different countries, I say, but how is it that we have this massive frontal cortex and maybe 1,000 times more intelligence than we possibly need to survive and procreate? That's all evolution is about. It's not becoming better, better, better. It's just, do you survive and procreate or not? If you don't, you're a failure. I'm a failure, actually. I had no kids. So I'm just one of those dead ends. Poor me. But I'm getting by somehow. And so it just doesn't take much intelligence to survive and procreate. But that's what evolution is all about, nothing more. So how on earth, I'm not going to appeal to theological answers here, but how come we're so smart? How do we have such memory, such imagination, and language skills? Well, evolutionarily, there's no answer. So we have all this excess, maybe 99.9% of our intelligence we don't need just to survive and have kids. So what do we do all the excess? Make better weapons, faster cell phones, cooler cars, more comfortable houses. I mean, what's it all for? So Eva gave a very brief glimpse of her quite fascinating life. I'll give you a little snippet of mine. I'm an old geezer. She's still in the prime, but I'm on my way out. This is my farewell, farewell. Slowly, slowly. So I lived a very good life. I was born in California, loving parents, very happy childhood. And my father's theologian, so he got his doctorate in Edinburgh. I lived in Scotland. We lived in Switzerland. We lived in Israel. High school, came back. I lived in Switzerland a year, again, as my father had a sabbatical year. And then I came back to university. I went to Germany for a year of university. So I feel very comfortable on both sides of the Atlantic. And just anybody looking at my childhood years, well, you lucked out, dude. You know, that was a pretty nice life you had. And yet by the time I was 20, with this nice life, you know, loving parents, I mean, there's nothing to complain about. I just found that I wasn't satisfied. And I was planning on a career in ecology. In 1970, do you think I could have gotten a job? You know, most likely. I was a pretty bright kid. But I looked at that and said, yeah, and this is good, I want to serve the environment, this is certainly very, very worthwhile. But where's the satisfaction? And where's the sense of meaning? And just getting a lot of scientific knowledge, that could be good for other people, but I wanted something more from inside. Very simply put, I wanted to live a meaningful life. as meaningful as possible, but I didn't want it to be based on fantasy. Some mere belief and ritual and yada, yada, yada. That, no, truth and meaning have to go together. It has to be true, but if it's true and meaningless, that's not satisfying. And there's an awful lot of truth in science, but not a whole lot of meaning. And then in religion, there's a lot of meaning, but a lot of kind of question, how true is that? I'm not saying it isn't, it raises questions, right? And so by the time I was 20, I just looked around in Euro-American society, because I was very comfortable on both sides of the Atlantic. And I said, there's got to be something more. There's got to be something more. So I escaped from California, the Nixon era, the Vietnam era. Some of you might remember that. And I just wanted to be someplace else, try something else. It wasn't anywhere within the horizon where I lived in Europe and America. And before long, I made my way to Germany, picked up a book on Buddhism, Tibet. And I thought, that's different. That's different. And then I just thought, this is so different. I think I'd like to learn more. So I spent my year in Germany studying Tibetan language. Back then, there was hardly anybody bilingual. And I figured, if this is serious, if this Dalai Lama, if he's serious, then I have to learn that language. They're not learning mine very quickly. So I spent a year learning Tibetan. And then gathered my pennies, bought a one-way ticket to India without enough money for a return ticket. Made my way right to Dharamsala, where the Dalai Lama lives. I was invited to stay at the home of his personal physician. I had a few strings. And I slipped in, and I'm living in this refugee community. They'd only been out of Tibet for about 12 years. And almost every village, maybe 2,000 people. And almost all these Tibetans, they're of all walks of life. They're nomads and farmers and shopkeepers and lamas and monks and nuns and so on. It's simply a sampling of a whole culture, but in a little village. And they're all refugees. And most have been traumatized. It was horrible. It was truly grotesque what happened to the country, the genocide that took place there. But very quickly, I was just astonished. Living in this little community, you would hold it in the palm of your hand practically, so small. I looked around, and you have some sense of my background, hardly underprivileged. And I looked at people around me in this little village. A lot of monks and nuns all over the place, and shopkeepers and so forth. And I just looked around, and I could speak a bit of Tibetan. And I looked around and I said, these are the happiest people I've ever met. Go figure. They're refugees. They've lost their homeland. They've lost loved ones. They've lost their culture. They've had their monasteries burned and books burned and so forth. What is going on here? These are gentle, loving, caring, warm-hearted people. And a few, of course, truly did suffer traumatically, psychologically. How could that not happen? But on the whole, wow. I've never lived in such a warm-hearted, open community before, and I'm coming in as this tall white dude. You know, I wasn't one of them, but just open up like one of the family. So I just hunkered down and said, boy, you know, like Sally meets Harry, whatever they got, I want some of that. Remember that line? Whatever they've got something really good, and I like more of that. They're not affluent, they're all poor. They've lost their homeland. They're in an alien country. And yet somehow they've adapted so quickly. And how did this happen? Well, I asked that question, and after a while I had some pretty clear answers. So it was only within a month or two of living there in this little village, and then starting to learn more about Buddhist meditation, philosophy, and nature of mind, that I had the opportunity to meet for the first time with His Holiness Dalai Lama, because I'm living in the home of his personal physician. He said, Alan, anytime you meet him, I can set it up for you. And I said, okay. So then I met with him only about a month or two after I arrived. And just being with him, this 36-year-old man, he's 87 now, young man, half my age. That first meeting it was a life changer. It was simply a life changer. There's some people who meet, they're rather rare, I think, but just being with them, this sense of goodness, a kindness, a compassion, and a wisdom. And we had our conversation. And I won't go into detail, I have to talk about something else here, right? But I knew I found my teacher. And he's been my teacher ever since 1971. And so very much in communication with him, guiding us, giving us the vision, encouragement, inspiration for the center that we first began, but it's slow in coming, but it's coming in Tuscany. And then suddenly we're presented with this land in Colorado. And then the crown jewel of them, frankly, 590 acres just up the hill. And my goodness, talk about potential. The first one is 5 hectares or 13 acres. And this one's 590. So the potential here is just majestic. What could be done here? So Eva has given some taste, a little teaspoon of what we're up to here. But it has nothing whatsoever to do about converting people to a religion or this or that, or even trying to make people religious. How do you do that even if you wanted to? Twist their arm or tweak their nose? How do you make a person religious? I'm not interested. And I'm not necessarily interested in meditation per se, as we've conceived it in the West, but I am deeply interested in cultivating the mind. If you've got one, and you don't cultivate it. Now, we do cultivate it. We're all educated. You wouldn't be sitting in these seats if you're not educated. What's education about? It's cultivating your mind, isn't it? Learning skills you didn't have, developing skills, reasoning skills, memory skills, imagination, creativity skills, learning crafts, trades, and so forth. That education is cultivation. Shall we call education meditation? Could, if you went back to the Indian term for it. And so that just began my life, and I won't carry on, but that started everything. And I've just been following that current. It's like a hound dog picking up a scent. You know, one of those that can pick up a scent from a mile away. I picked up the scent when I was in Germany, and then I sniffed my way to India. And at the Dalai Lama said, oh, I think I found where the scent came from. But not just one man. And so I've been studying and practicing, and then gradually translating and teaching. Translated for the Dalai Lama on many occasions, starting in 1979. Especially when he's met with scientists. So I've had just an extraordinarily fortunate life. And as the Dalai Lama told me when I first met him in that first meeting, he said, the more understanding you have, the more intelligence, the more knowledge you have, the more responsibility you have. And I think it's generally true, right? And so I've been tremendously fortunate in just receiving so many gifts of a total immersion for 14 years. And then deciding, well, I left the West as if there was nothing of value there. Well, we all know that's silly. But at the time, it just didn't compare to what I was finding there living with the Tibetans. First in India, later in Switzerland. But then I thought, no, let's go back and check out Western civilization. Maybe I missed something. So I went back and finished my undergraduate degree in physics as a Buddhist monk. I was ordained by the Dalai Lama. I was a monk for 14 years. But I went as a Buddhist monk back to Amherst College and completed a degree in physics. And I thought, that tasted good, let's try a bit more. And then I got my doctorate in comparative religion from Stanford University. And then I think about all the education I had from Amherst and Stanford, taught for 4 years in the University of California. That, my goodness, I receive bounties now from the East, from teachers in India and Sri Lanka, Mongolia, Bhutan, India, Tibet. Bounties. I've received so much due to other people's generosity. Then all the education I had at Amherst and Stanford was all scholarship. So I just feel, wow, I received so much kindness from other people. Then what are you going to do? If you're just a sensible person, you say, well, then what can I give back? And so this vision of these centers for contemplative research, they arose in my mind, but you have these, 4 rivers, isn't it, coming together in this area? Well, I had 2 great big rivers, like the Mississippi and the Nile, flowing into my mind. The Mississippi of this wisdom from multiple traditions within Asia, especially Buddhism. Then also Western philosophy, physics, philosophy of mind sciences, another great current. Both of them going back up to the same time, the time of Pythagoras, the time of Buddha, they were contemporaries. So these great rivers have flowed into my mind stream. And then they flow out. That's what you're getting right now. There's nobody here, by the way. It's an empty house. But you're getting current flowing from all my teachers. So you're getting a lot for one person, because I'm just a little walking mouth. So we have these centers for contemplative research. They all came from the wisdom I received from my teachers in the West and the East, and finding how profoundly complementary they are. It's not one's better than another. Tibet had almost no technology at all. Their highest technology was a water mill or a railroad. That's as good as it got. But you know they had really good ones? And if it worked really well in the 11th century, what do you need to make? And so the water mills in the 20th century were basically the same ones of the 11th century, because if it grinds the grain very well, then, what more do you need? So their technology was a complete standstill. Knowledge of modern science, astronomy, biology, chemistry, physics, nada, not there, nothing there at all. But then you can say, well, were they just a little sleepy hollow of people sitting around gazing at the sky and eating their parched barley? And their progress, their insights, were invisible to the outsider. Invisible to the outsider. Because here is a country where 1 out of every 4 men was a monk. 1 out of every 6 women was a nun. And their job as monks and nuns is cultivate your mind. So why is it that these Tibetan refugees were the happiest people I've ever met? Because they're raised in a culture where the wisdom, they don't have rock stars and they don't have super politicians and business billionaires. They have none of that. The leaders, those who inspired the entire society, were those trained for years and decades in their monasteries, cultivating compassion, cultivating attention and mindfulness, cultivating wisdom, cultivating an ethical way of life, non-violence, benevolence. That was their education. When I first learned about it, I said, oh, that's the education I wanted. And now I found it. An education that's really from the inside out and not just getting a bunch of skills from the outside. Those are important. So I thought, well, Eva's done a wonderful job giving this brief introduction to the Center for Contemplative Research. And you can imagine, if you're kind of sympathetic, well, this could be very good for those few people, 13 in our center in Crestone. We have a couple in Castellina in Tuscany, but it's growing quickly. And then here, there's enormous potential here. And one could easily think, well, that's very nice for you folks, just like it's nice if you're an Olympic gold medalist, good for you, but what really is that for us? What is it for anybody else, except for entertainment every couple of years? That's a good question. Good question. How are we giving back, not just me as an individual, but those like Eva's dedicated now many, many months to helping the administration of our center in Colorado. Wonderful group of people here. Here, Kiwis themselves, some Aussies as well. And this is an international center. It's not just for New Zealand, not just for Australia. It's the Asia Pacific Center. But very soon, you'll be able to be a truly international center, thanks to your immigration laws in New Zealand. We have a center of this type operating for 6 years. Then you can have people coming 5 or 6 years. Then people from all over the world can come and get visas for 1, 4, 5, 6 years and get really serious training. She gave the example of Olympic athletes, but how about just getting a medical degree? You've just finished your undergraduate and you'd like to be a brain surgeon. How many years do you think that is? Well, a good 6 to 8, right? You get your medical degree first and then your specialization. And I've never had any medical training. I know a lot of my doctors now. And when you're right in the midst of your medical training, if you're a father, you're not a good father. It consumes you. It's so demanding. You can be loving, but you just don't have much time for your spouse or your kids. But you figure, okay, it's a brief sacrifice for them now, but I'm going to come back and I can be a doctor. I can heal people. And maybe another 2 years of specialization. Okay, neurology, brain science, and so forth. So more time. But then if you had a brain aneurysm or something like that and you need a surgery, you wouldn't go to a guy with a knife who reads books on the brain for 20 minutes a day. Go ahead and bring your, I think I know what to do here. You'd have to be actually quite crazy to go for that. You want somebody who's been through those 8 years of training and maybe a good 10, 20 years on top of it. That's your only brain, so you chew that one up, you're pretty, end of story. And that's your brain. Well, we're offering something similar here. It's like getting a PhD in the first-person investigation into the nature of mind, potentials of the mind, not only how it is, but what are its potentials in cultivating our attention skills, mindfulness, cultivating empathy. Can it be cultivated? The warmth and caring and the love of loving kindness, the compassion for others, not just my friends and relatives, but the kind of compassion that's idealized in all of the great religions. Love thy neighbor as yourself. He didn't say if they're white or if they're Jewish, but no. And that neighbors, wouldn't they kind of include other species too? I mean, we're sharing this land with, they also want to be happy. The birds, mammals, and so forth. So are they our neighbors too? And so to bring this out, to offer something, we have the centers. And what we're doing is a deep research there. And we're already finding, because I'm collaborating with scientists now for more than 20, 30 years by now, neuroscientists, psychologists, and so forth. And they've done a lot of studies of kind of ordinary people. Oh, do 20 minutes of mindfulness and this can help with your immune system. It can help with dopamine levels and help with this. It's all good. It's all good. But what I'm finding is my ears against the wall frequently is now they're looking, well, we've done hundreds of studies now with pretty much ordinary people practicing 20 minutes a day. But we'd like to find some people who really deeply cultivated compassion. I'd like to find people who've really deeply cultivated samadhi, or very deep meditative concentration. I'd like to study people who've really cultivated extraordinary mental balance, mental resilience, what people will need in the coming years and decades, because we all know it's coming down. You can't open a newspaper or check out CNN or BBC or anything without saying, oh man, the next 10, 20, 30 years looks pretty darn bleak. You have to have a lot of courage to have kids these days. Because we've created this and they inherit it. So kids today, they're going to need a lot of help. I can imagine even there's some kids alive now that might make it to the end of this century. Can you imagine? Not me, but make it to 2100. What will the world look like? What will New Zealand look like in 2100? Well, different. And between now and then, it's just certain nobody needs to be, mystical or have some clairvoyance or anything. It's going to be tough going. Even in Australia, much out of the current, good governance, magnificent land, eco-friendly, good education, good social infrastructure. You people are so tremendously fortunate. This is really an island of sanity, especially when I consider what's happening in American politics right now. Fortunate you. But even here, this is not going to be an easy time, let alone in the poorer countries that are getting overrun by the effects of global climate change and so on, let alone the Ukrainians, let alone, where there's a war, there's civil strife and so forth. We need to prepare our children. We've created the mess, my generation, your generation. We've created the mess, but they're going to inherit it. We're going to just die off. We're going to be gone. And so this brings us to the outreach. It's all very well. We'll have maybe 10, 20, 30 people here, maybe more over time. That's all very nice. Well, good. I hope you do really well. Maybe we'll bring scientists in to study you and see how your brains function and so forth. But what about everybody else? Is that really enough? Are we offering back to society enough? And my answer is no. That's not enough. It's wonderful, I think. Tremendous potential. I think have some insight there, potential benefits. But if we look at just educational, now, is there anybody in Murchison that says education, that's for the birds, who needs it? I don't think there's one person. They might want this kind of education or that kind of education. But just generally, education, no, that's for ivory town. No, nobody's thinking that. So then I think, well, what do parents, many of you I'm sure are parents. I have a stepdaughter. So I haven't quite made full-fledged big father, but I'm right there. Semi-step. But what do parents want for their children? And I thought about it, and I'm going to say something utterly not novel. Parents want their children to succeed, so they make a good livelihood, not be poor in the gutter, cast out. They all want their children to succeed. I don't think as a parent on the planet say, I hope you really wind up in the gutter. Never. And that means making a livelihood, right? Whether it's a school teacher, or a carpenter, or a politician, or an educator, we want our children to succeed. Not fail. And that's what we expect of the education system. My child is coming in at the age of 5, doesn't know how to make a living, doesn't have a clue, doesn't even know how to read or write or arithmetic. So educators, help my child succeed. Give my child the tools, the skills to follow the vocation that is my child's aspiration. Whether it's high level, getting a PhD in something, or whether it's being a very honest and reputable storekeeper. They're all good. We need all of those people. If your plumbing breaks, you don't ask a meditator, hey, meditator, come and fix my plumbing. And so we want them to succeed. But certainly we want more than that. So you're making a living, you're not dying of poverty. Well, that's a good start, but really, is that it? Survival and procreation? And I think not. We want our children to be happy. I mean, pet parent does, sociopath maybe, but we want them to be happy. Not just getting by, but always depressed and anxious and getting popping psychopharmaceutical drugs just to get through the day. We don't want that. We want them to be happy. We also want them to be healthy. Physically healthy, certainly that's important, but also mentally healthy. Not suffering from PTSD or general anxiety disorder or depression or insomnia or ADHD or all the other kind of mental diseases. We don't want to have mentally ill children growing up, just getting by, dependent on. Nobody wants that. We want our children to be physically and mentally healthy. If they can be exceptionally healthy, that'd be even great, even better. So we want them to succeed, we want them to be happy, we want them to be healthy, mentally, because mental health is, if anything, even more important than physical health. There are people who are physically challenged in wheelchairs and so forth, who are mentally healthy and living very happy, meaningful lives. But for people who are psychotic or just driven to mind-crippling depression and so forth, well, they don't have happy lives. Even if they're Olympic athletes, that's not a happy life. We want them to succeed. We want them to be happy. We want them to be physically and mentally healthy and help them as much as we can. Have we missed anything? Yeah, one more thing. Isn't it true? We want our children to be good people. We don't want them to become drug peddlers or thieves or bandits or swindlers or con artists. We don't want them to be killers. We don't want them to be harsh and evil people. We want them to be good people. And it doesn't have to be Christian or Buddhist or religious, but we all can recognize a good person. We all recognize good behavior. There's a very kind person, there's a generous person, there's a patient person, there's a very wise person, and we know the opposite as well. And they do a lot of mischief. So there's four things, right? And wouldn't you agree, this is common ground. New Zealand, America, Brazil, who cares? That's everywhere. Now, what is our school system doing in terms of those four? What's the focus? 1 out of 4. Isn't it true? They don't ask how happy you are and give you, if you're just kind of getting by. There's no particular training if you're kind of happy. There's no particular education to become mentally healthy, and maybe even like the physical immune system be really, really healthy, like the Olympic athletes. Where's that? And then not ramming some moralistic tradition down their throats, like, uptight, rigid. If you want to do that, then you can, but that's not what we generally want. We want them to be good people. So what nurturing, what guidance are they getting in our secular system? I think they should be secular. Because we have Buddhists and Muslims and Jews and Christians. You can't, if it's a Christian school, then great, it's all Christian. But most people are not going to religious schools. And so what kind of help are they getting to become ethical people? And when I say ethical, I mean something really simple. That is, with all respect for Christian ethics, which is a bit different from Jewish ethics, and Muslim and so forth. There are differences, of course there are. But once again, what I'm interested in common ground. Not battling this ethical system versus another. And common ground is, wouldn't we agree that nonviolence is a good idea? Nonviolence with our fellow human beings. Don't harm people, as a general principle. And don't harm our fellow sentient beings, like just wiping them out or exterminating. Let's not do that. We need them, they need us. At least we need them. And then likewise for the environment, the natural environment. A non-injurious life, not wiping out natural habitat, emptying the oceans of fish, filling it with plastic, the ground with pesticides and so forth. That's violence. That's violence. And so I think we could all agree, well, that's a good place to start. Let's be as non-violent as we can with body, speech, and mind. Is that enough? Actually, a bit more would be nice. When we have the opportunity to be benevolent, kind, act of charity, kindness, goodness, isn't that a good thing? Just generally speaking, and we know goodness when we see it. You don't have to be brain scientists to figure that one out. And so a full education that could prepare young people like, 71, maybe younger than me, and younger than that. Older than me is a bit old, but if you're 71, you're old, you're young from my perspective. But what I'm saying seriously is that this is what we all want. We want for ourselves, our children, we want for society, that we don't have poverty. It doesn't turn out well for anybody in the long term. We want people to be happy, because if they're not happy, they start creating mischief. We want them to be mentally balanced. What we've seen in politics recently, mentally imbalanced people getting into high positions of power, they do a lot of damage really quickly. I'm not pointing a finger here or there, but we all know it's true. And then finally, if people in influence heading businesses, heading governments, if they're just self-centered, greedy, and malevolent, they can do a lot of harm. So we want people, especially these people in positions of benevolence, I believe, I'm an outsider, so I know very little, but from an outsider's perspective, your Prime Minister here seems like a very benevolent person. And I think she really appears to me. I'm just an outsider. I'm certainly trying to inform you. From the outsider perspective, it seems like she's really trying to serve her country to the best of her ability. And maybe somebody else can do a better job. That's for you to decide. But unlike a lot of other politicians I've heard about, I don't see any benevolence at all. They're there to get power and increase their power and hold on to their power, and everything else comes second. That's quite common. So it strikes me as a sheer outsider with a very superficial knowledge. You're very fortunate here. So I'm going to wrap up here. I've been going on a long time, my goodness. She was so brief, but I tend to run on sentences. I'll wrap up. We, together with this CCR's branches, about 2 years ago, we initiated a program called the Mental Balance Initiative. And it's really looking at what is mental balance and how can it be cultivated? Again, we're not talking religion here, meditation, some esoteric thing. But cultivating 6 types of mental balance, 6 types of intelligence. And I'll run them just quickly. They're not difficult, but some of them will be unfamiliar to your ears, I think. The first term is a term hardly anybody who's not a psychologist even knows, but it's enormously important. It's a term called conation. Most people, It's just the faculty, like we have emotion and cognition, and we have attention. Conation is the faculty of desire, aspirations, ideals, priorities. It's very simple. What are your priorities? What are your desires? What are your deeper desires? What are your most important desires? What are the guiding lights that lead you in your life? That's conation. Well, sometimes they say, be careful what you look for, what you seek. It may not turn out very well. That would be cognitive unintelligence. To strive for something, but it actually won't turn out well at the end. Cognitive intelligence, being wise in our desires, our aspirations, our ideals. Now, in secular education, succeed. Get wealth, become affluent. You succeed. That's a priority. Grow in positions of authority, influence, power. Oh, you're head of that company. Oh, you're head of that state. You're a governor. You're a very influential person. Oh, you succeeded. And oh, wow, you became a rock star. You became a famous singer. Oh, wow, I've seen you on the screen. You're an actor, aren't you? Oh, you're famous. Oh, you succeeded. You're a well-known actor. I recognize you. Wow, you succeeded. Wealth, power, and prestige. Many people are striving for one of those or a combination, aren't they? Do you know of anybody who's really wealthy and totally miserable? Do you know of anybody who's very powerful but maybe psychotic? And do you know of anybody who's really famous and then commits suicide because they can't even stand being alive anymore? So shouldn't all 5-year-olds know that? That if you think, what will make me happy? Do you think, I want to be rich. I want to be powerful. I want to be famous. You might want to think again. Because look at the superstars. And many of them are basket cases. It's not bad to be rich, powerful, or famous, but if you think that's going to make you happy, you just might want to think again. That's cognitively unintelligent. So cultivating wise desires. That's the first one. Secondly, ethical intelligence. It's very easy to say nonviolence and benevolence. We all understand what they mean. But is there such a thing as ethical intelligence? Nonviolence, you mean absolutely never do anything violent? In other words, don't step in your car. Because if you drive, you're probably going to kill a bug. Right? Don't walk in the streets. You'll probably step on a bug. Don't ever eat meat, even if your body really needs. Some people need some meat, or at least eggs, dairy. Some people can't really be healthy without it. Well, what are you going to do? Oh, no, I would rather wither away. So to be human, we're on this planet. We're going to damage something, even with the best of intentions. Well, how can we minimize that? Right? And in benevolence, well, how about a parent that says, I love my child so much, I never scold her. I never punish her. I just let her grow up and I just want her to be happy every day. And whatever she says, I just give her support. Oh, you want to try cocaine? Well, it's an adventure you've never tried, but if you really want to do it, then okay, sweetie, I just love you to bits. And if you want to try cocaine, then why not? Sweetie pie. Well, that's very benevolent. It's as stupid as a rock. Right? And so ethical intelligence, attention. ADHD is really common now, in children. And what's our primary intervention? Drugs, Adderall, Ritalin. And the drugs that simply suppress the symptoms. They don't cure, they'll never cure you. And so we're treating the symptoms and never getting the cause. Can attention be cultivated? One of my heroes is the American pioneering psychologist William James, who died about 112 years ago. He said if there were an education system that could train children to develop their attention skills, that would be the education system par excellence. And he said, I don't have a clue how to do it. And now we're 120 years later. Are the kids here in the schools of Murchison, are they learning how to really develop attention skills? They come in the classroom for a 50-minute class and they're there the whole time. Attentive, clear, discerning, focused. Not easy. It doesn't come naturally. Can you train attention? You see, I'm not talking about religion here. The only time I'll mention it is not to mention it. Attention skills. Cognitive skills. Have you ever seen something that wasn't there and not seen something that was? Have you ever assumed something about a person or a situation that just wasn't true, but you were certain it was? Seeing there that which isn't there, and not seeing that which is in plain sight and still not seeing it. Cognitive deficit, cognitive hyperactivity happens all over the place. In politics, interpersonal relationships, we're not being attentive to what reality is dishing out from moment to moment. And so instead of seeing clearly what's there, we project from our own minds that which isn't there. And if we have blinders on, like, oh, women are not capable of doing things like mathematics and so forth, they just can't do it. Well, then it's right there and you can't see it. I mean, it wasn't that long ago women couldn't get into university, let alone become a doctor or a president or a prime minister. Forget about it. Why? Oh, because women can't do that kind of thing. Well, that's not true. But boy, were they sure that was true. That's cognitive. And then emotional intelligence. Well, a friend of mine, Dan Goleman, you might know of, became quite famous for popularizing emotional intelligence. There are people who are emotional basket cases. Really, they're just so fragile, imbalanced, gyrating off the walls, hyperactive or emotionally dead within. Emotional resilience, being able to face challenging times and rise to the occasion in a very sensible, open-hearted, compassionate, wise way. Emotional intelligence is huge. And then I'll just briefly light on the last one. When we, in the quiet of our homes, when we're simply sitting quietly and reflecting on our lives, and we ask the simple questions, what am I here for? What's the meaning of human existence? And does this world around us, does it have meaning, or is it just a big mindless machine? And if I can live a meaningful life, what would that constitute? And how would I do it? How could I find genuine well-being that's sustainable and not just a bunch of arousals of this pleasure and that pleasure that then dissipates immediately? Asking the deeper questions. Where did I come from? And what happens at death? Let's not pretend the scientists know, because they don't have a clue. Scientists community, and I work a lot with scientists, I attend to them with respect. It's an extraordinary discipline. But they have no idea. I've worked with world-class people here. They have no idea how consciousness emerges in the human embryo. Not a clue. But from the egg, the sperm combination, how does consciousness arise from chemicals? They don't have a clue. So no idea whatsoever how consciousness comes about in the mother's womb, let alone 3.5 billion years ago when the first sentient organisms evolved on our planet. When did that happen? How would that happen? What were the necessary causal conditions for inanimate living organisms, like a carrot or potato, to become conscious and be aware of anything at all? Don't have a clue. I mean, they're clueless to the point of being clueless about being clueless. And if you don't know the origins of consciousness and how do the mind and body interrelate, they don't have a clue. They really don't have a clue. This is not putting them down, it's calling a spade a spade. And then what happens at death? Since we're all going to face it, wouldn't it be good to have a sneak preview? Or some idea, not just go in blind? And I think it's oblivion, I believe it's oblivion. Oh, it's not oblivion. If you go in totally unprepared, that would be kind of a bummer. Because if your consciousness doesn't cease as soon as your brain does, then does it ever cease? So I'm not pitching any dogma here, but let's face ignorance as ignorance. And any scientist, neuroscientist, or anybody else that says, oh, what happens at death is usually become nothing. If that's your belief, that's fine, but that's like believing in fairies or leprechauns. It's just a belief. You don't have any evidence at all. What you know is the brain goes dead. Oh, wow, as if that's some breaking news. So just face ignorance as ignorance and saying, well, The scientific community doesn't know, but might anybody else? Because the scientists have gotten actually nowhere. There's been no progress in 150 years. Where does consciousness come from? How does it interface with the body? And what happens at death? These are pretty important if you happen to be one of those people who's alive and is conscious. If you're not, you can leave the room right now because you came to the wrong building. But this is us. This is not for those other people who die and are born and have mind-body interactions all the time. And so, just because the scientific community doesn't have interest, does that mean nobody does? Or might somebody? And if so, how do we know? And how can we find out? Well, the Center for Contemplative Research is not just a bunch of people going off and meditating, but for each of our centers, we're laying out the red carpet from the very beginning. Scientists with open minds who recognize what you don't know and would like to know. And we contemplatives, we know, but we also know what we don't know. Don't ask a contemplative about how the brain works. They have nothing to say. We have nothing to say. So there's a wonderful complementarity here. The neuroscientists know enormous about the brain, but almost nothing about consciousness. Yogis know a lot about consciousness and virtually nothing about the brain. So do we have to choose? Well, whose side are you on? That'd be silly. So then, of course, you bring these two great traditions. I mean great. The great tradition of science, including psychology, neuroscience, and so on, and bring these together with the great contemplative traditions, because we're not here to pluck one religion or one contemplative tradition, and do something unprecedented in human history. We know that science and religion have been battling since the time of Galileo, and not Galileo, Darwin, but even Galileo. Of course, he got house arrest for saying that obnoxious thing that the Earth goes around the sun. Naughty, naughty. They finally forgave him, by the way. I think about 300 years after he did. Okay, we're sorry. So we know there's a lot of tension between science and religion. Okay, but how about open-minded religious people? How about open-minded scientists? Scientists who keeply want to know about nature of consciousness, its origins. Contemplatives who would love to learn from the scientific community. So we can bring these two great streams here in a valley with all these streams coming together. The great stream of scientific knowledge with so much altruism. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of weapons and all of that, but there's a lot of good in science. A lot of ethical people. I know some of them. And they really want to be of service. And their method is science. I work with neuroscientists like that. And on the contemplative side, there are a lot of close-minded religious people. And Buddhism, of course. It just goes with the territory. But there are open-minded people. The Dalai Lama is a spectacular example of that. He's commented, if you can present me with any scientific truth that refutes any assertion in Buddhism whatsoever, clearly, then I will throw out the Buddhist assertion. We have to go where truth is. We have to go where the evidence lies. So you name it, reincarnation, karma, anything. Show me the evidence that refutes it, I'll go with the evidence. It doesn't really sound like a religious leader, does it? Who tend to stick to their guns no matter what. But he's exceptional. And I am just, I can't say proud, I'm grateful to be able to walk in his footsteps. So our initiative, our mental balance initiative, is very much looking to education. To introduce elements of mental balance into education. No religious strings attached. You're a religious fundamentalist? Fine, welcome. You're an atheist? Fine, welcome. We're not here talking about religion, but we are talking about mental balance, mental health, and how to cultivate it, and how to do our best for our children. Because we've given them, we say in American, we've given them a raw deal. I had a good deal, born in 1950, that was pretty sweet. World War was over, America's becoming number one. Pretty nice place to grow up. So we're looking to education. We're looking to mental health care. You're depressed, you're anxious, can't sleep, attention problem. There are some really wonderful therapists out there, but overwhelmingly, what do you get? A drug. And I've checked with professionals. Is there one psychopharmaceutical drug that cures a single mental disease? Zero. Billions of dollars are being made, but all they do is to suppress the symptoms. They're not criticizing, that's just a fact. They're suppressing the symptoms. Well, how about mental health that is actually envisioning genuine well-being? A kind of well-being that's sustainable and isn't dependent upon nice situations, versus hedonia, or mundane pleasure, that's always requires some stimulation. How about the cultivation of genuine well-being? How can we cultivate that? And when people are suffering mental distress, can we get to the causes? And I've worked a lot with neuroscientists now for 30 years, and hardly any mental problems originate in the brain. You know, it's true. Not anxiety, not depression. Some things like autism and Alzheimer's, yes. But depression, anxiety, ADHD, post-traumatic PTSD, they don't originate in the brain. The brain's along for the ride. And so if you're going to address the causes of mental distress, look more to the mind than just neurons and synapses. So we're looking to be of service to the mental health profession, to education, to bring greater clarity and insight in the business world, and especially in my homeland, which is really very distressed now politically. Wouldn't it just be good for the whole world if American politicians were more sane? Wouldn't we all be very happy about that? Let alone in Russia or China. Or finally, thank goodness, Brazil is out from under the yoke of their recent dictator. Hallelujah. Sometimes you suffer and then you free yourself. So this is the Mental Balance Initiative with about 40 scientists in 13 countries on 5 continents. And the host for this initiative, very broad sweeping, to cultivate 6 modes of mental balance, is working across borders, India, Brazil, Europe, and so forth and so on, to really do all we can to help people achieve mental balance and apply that in education, mental health, and so forth and so on. So that's our outreach. That's our outreach. And the host for this initiative, very cross-cultural, interdisciplinary, and gathering together this brilliant talent from around the world. The host is our centers for contemplative research. And on this, I've gone much longer than I anticipated, but I just kind of get used to it, you know. It's like being a surfer, it hits the wave, and if the wave is still curling, you just say, I don't want off. And so I just gave a lecture just a couple of days ago at the University of Canterbury. A wonderful professor there. And he's in sync with everything I said here. Wonderful man. And he's already spoken with the Vice Chancellor of the university, a fine university, and said, you know, in Australia now they have 2 centers for contemplative studies. And they're really starting. Eva was just there, you know, working closely with the people there, open-minded, really asking deep questions. And I asked of the benefactor for those. He gave 20 million here and 20 million there. I said, might you be interested in funding something in New Zealand, given a very close relationship? He said, yeah, I'm open to it. And so this professor, Arindam Basu, wonderful man, he hosted me. He said, you know, there's a lot of interest here. We would love to have such a center here. And in a couple of days, I'm going to lecture at the University of Otago. And they're very interested there as well. So wouldn't it be marvelous to have at least 2 centers for contemplative studies here in this magnificent country? And then let that flow from there out into education, into government into mental health. And these centers are just places where the real hardcore research is being done. But we need to attend to our family, our fellow Kiwis, our fellow Aussies, our fellow Americans, fellow sentient beings. And so I ran on a lot. I hope I haven't bored you. But I thought I would say something a bit complimentary to what Eva shared with you. So you can see, I'm very enthusiastic and actually hopeful. There's so many reasons to be depressed and pessimistic, and I'm neither. The problems are there, but we created them. It didn't just happen to us. We created them. And if we are so intelligent to create such complex problems, then we're also so intelligent to solve them. What we've created, we can uncreate. And maybe we can move on in a whole stage of human evolution. Not genetic, but maturing, wiser, more compassionate, more ethical. Maybe we can actually flourish together. You know, that's my aspiration. That's the meaning of my life. So thank you for your attention.
We would love to invite questions. I don't know, shall we pass the microphone around or you have another one? Excellent. We would love to know what you're asking. And I think it'll lead to many more nuances of what's going on as we respond to your questions.
You know us a little bit. I would like to know about you.
Thank you. So you've been here a few days, living in the Matiri Valley. Why do you think the Matiri Valley is a good place to cultivate the mind?
So there are certain conditions that one seeks out in general to cultivate the mind to the level of stillness that I was speaking about before. And the first of those is an ideal environment which is safe, which is quiet, which is removed enough from the hustle and bustle of a town or a city that one is not being, even the mind is not being drawn out primarily by sound, but also the energy. I'm sure many of you are very sensitive, especially if you've been living out here for a long time and then you go to a bigger city like Christchurch or Auckland or in another country, you feel the vibrations get so intense, especially in our contemporary digital age where electricity is just driving everything. And so for meditators, they become more and more sensitive to those things. And so I can say just from the last 2 days in Matiri Valley, or a day and a half, it feels energetically closer to Crestone, Colorado than anywhere else I've been, in the sense of, because we already know that is an ideal place. I won't go into details, but it is remote. It's in a vast valley with high mountains and very, very silent relative to the rest of the United States for sure. And so here, the combination of deep silence, which comes from not being close to the radio waves and the electricity and all the other things that one would have in any place less natural than this. I want to say it doesn't feel withdrawn in the sense of way out, away from civilization. On the contrary, looking out over the valley from the highlands of this property, it feels so protected, precisely in the level of human presence that has been here, that has cultivated this valley, but has not encroached upon that deep natural silence. And I would say likewise, the weather patterns, obviously this is just a day and a half in the life of Matiri Valley, but I sense that the quiet of the green, of the cloud cover, the gentleness of the landscape makes me want to meditate, makes me want to go into the kind of deep silence that I have cultivated elsewhere. So that's a very, first impression, experiential response, but I'm sure you would.
A tiny bit. I went on and on and on, so I'll be very, very concise. There's another element too that was implied in what she said, but I'll make it explicit. Natural beauty. Natural beauty. As we're driving, just was it 2 days ago, from Christchurch to here, what a drive. What a drive. You know, we saw rainbows and sunlight bursting through and torrential rain and then more sunlight and this gorgeous valley here and these snow-capped peaks there, and that's just in 3.5 hours. Wow. And then we got here, oh, wow. And one of my beloved teachers, she's a woman, Mama, very senior, and as a young woman, she's beautiful. She's a princess of Tibet. She's one of my mamas, one of my teachers. And I asked her a woman who is truly beautiful, she's like my spiritual mother. And I said, what role do you think beauty has in spiritual practice? She said, oh, it's very important. It makes the heart happy. So you look around here in this natural environment, it's peaceful, it's quiet, it's harmonious. And even though we're just a few miles out of town, here's a community. I'm sure you have a good education system. You have good governance. It can always be better, but it's good. And it's harmonious and very eco-friendly, very eco-sensitive, your whole country. I'm sure this valley is no exception. It's peaceful and it's beautiful. So when you're in deep meditating 8, 10, 12, 14 hours a day, you're not getting entertainment. You're not cruising on the internet. You're not chatting with people. You're not listening to rock and roll or what have you. But you always want to be happy. We always want to be happy. So if you're coming out and you feel a little bit tired, maybe a bit exhausted, maybe a little bit tense from what came up in meditation, and you step out and you look around and it's just, oh, it's so beautiful here. It takes your mind off of your own little closed-minded little problems. And you say about the beauty around me, the birds, the animals here, is so beautiful. And this is a place of beauty and harmony. And in Crestone, its high desert is majestic, it's rather awesome, it's dry, rocky peaks piercing the sky. It's impressive, and great big valley, 60 miles across, something like that. It's wow, this is big sky country. It's Colorado, not Montana. And then in our little jewel of property, only 5 hectares of 13 acres in Tuscany. Well, shall I say anything more? Looks out over the Pacific, a great valley, and snow-capped peaks on the horizon. You look at it, you just want to fall in love. It's so gorgeous. You step out of your cabin and say, oh, I just want to gaze for a while. So you're not getting entertainment, you're not chatting, you're not killing time doing this and that and the other thing. But if you can just sit quietly outside and feel, there's so much beauty here. And it doesn't arouse, oh, I want to purchase that, or can I, it doesn't give rise to that. It gives rise to, thank you, thank you. And your soul is nourished. You find some peace of mind. So, oh, I'm living in such a beautiful place. How fortunate am I? So that's why we're here. And the very good intuition of Mark and Serena, because they were the scouts. They were the scouts, and they looked up and down the island. I was quite focused on the South Island, trying to find a place on the South Island. Well, they went down to Otago, they went to the Alps here and here and here, and they kept on, and then they got here, and I think, if I may say so, Serena said, here's the spot. And Mark said, yeah. And then they showed us photos. We said, yeah. So they pretty much scanned the South Island, and jackpot. Thank you, Murchison Sport.
Yeah, it seems like we should wrap this up. Is that correct?
Yes.
And I've just been asked to wrap this up, and I really don't know how to do that. But just thank you for sharing the vision for this place, but also for in a bigger scheme of things. It's been really inspiring to listen to it and really enlightening. And also thank you to this is my second time to New Zealand, my first time to the South Island, and I just like Alan said, this is an amazingly beautiful place, but also everyone I met has been just really friendly, and there's such a great energy and atmosphere here. So yeah, thank you for welcoming us here, and again, thank you so much. And I think that's the wrap of this. And now
please
there is
join us for some tea and the pizza. Yeah. And Mark, can you accompany us?
okay. Yeah, there's food and drinks. I think that's the message. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you.